Good evening. It's great to see you all here tonight. Thanks for joining us for the first talk in this year's Dr. Bruce J. Nelson Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm Jeff Groves, Dean of the Faculty and Professor of Literature at Harvey Mudd College. This year, the Nelson Series theme is Now, Social Justice and STEM. And we're excited to spend the next few months exploring contemporary issues of social justice and considering how we might incorporate social justice work in both our daily practice and our long-range plans. Tonight, we are pleased to begin this conversation with Melina Abdullah, the chair of the Department of Pan-African Studies at Cal State Los Angeles, and a chief organizer of the Los Angeles chapter of Black Lives Matter. Before Melina is further introduced, I'd like to acknowledge the generosity of the family of the late Bruce J. Nelson, class of 1974, for establishing this educational series to honor Bruce's memory. Bruce died unexpectedly in 1999, though not before having a tremendous impact on the many people whose lives he touched as an unconventional, eclectic, and irrepressible free spirit. He graduated from Harvey Mudd as an independent program of studies major and later earned his master's in computer science from Stanford and his PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon. At the time of his death, he was the chief science officer at Cisco Systems. We're honored and grateful to the Nelson family for the opportunity we have each fall to host exceptional speakers who are at the forefront of their respective fields. And I also want to offer thanks to the Nelson Series committee members for planning this year's series and bringing tonight's speaker to campus. Faculty and staff members Sharon Gerbode, Dagan Karp, Colleen Lewis, Sumi Pendikur, and Beth Truskowski, all as well as students Ramonda Giddings and Lisa Geller. It's now my pleasure to welcome Sumi Pendikur to the podium to introduce Melina.
Hi, everyone. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tanisha Anderson, Freddie Gray, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, John Crawford, Alicia Thomas, Ezell Ford, Tamir Rice, Rekia Boyd, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Tarika Wilson. This is why we're here, to center the experiences of those we have lost through the gravest forms of injustice in search of a new way of doing things, a new way of building society. Our Harvey Mudd College mission exhorts us to understand the impact of our work on society, but this year's Nelson Series ensures that we are deeply cognizant of society's impact on our work. On behalf of the Nelson Lecture Series Committee, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for the evening, Dr. Melina Abdullah. Woo-hoo! So before I continue fangirling, let's go forward. Melina is professor and chair of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. She earned her PhD from the University of Southern California, Fanon, in political science, and her BA from Howard University in African American Studies. She was appointed to the Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission in 2014 and is a recognized expert on race relations. Abdullah is the author of numerous articles and book chapters with subjects ranging from political coalition building to womanist mothering. What binds her research together is a focus on power allocation and societal transformation. She's currently writing a book manuscript that examines hip-hop and political mobilization. Abdullah is also a leader in the fight for ethnic studies in K-12 and university systems and was a part of the historic victory that made ethnic studies a requirement in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Professor Abdullah is a womanist scholar activist, recognizing that the role that she plays in the academy is intrinsically linked to broader struggles for the liberation of oppressed people. Melina serves on the leadership team for Black Lives Matter and is committed to ending state-sponsored and police violence towards all people, and especially Black people. Melina is also a soccer mama of 3 children and resides in Mid-City, Los Angeles. Please join me in giving a huge welcome to Dr. Melina Abdullah.
So thank you so much for having me. It's been really great getting to know some of the faculty and staff and students. I had a chance to get to know some folks over dinner, and I was just wonderfully hosted. So thank you for making this a great experience so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter and about why we're in a movement, in the midst of a movement, not simply a moment. And that said, I want you to think about what it is you want me to address, okay? So I'm going to walk through, but if at any time you need me to stop and pause and go back and engage, we can flow, okay? So however we need to flow, we'll flow. Does that work for y'all? Okay. So thank you again, Sumi. I was hoping that Black Lives Matter Inland Empire would be here, but they ran into a little bit of an emergency tonight, so I will lift them up in some actions. It's really important for me, and what I'm learning as an organizer is that when we have a room full of people, we need to ask y'all to do something, right? Because the movement that we're in isn't about any single person. It isn't about any small group of people. It's about recognizing that the movement is about all of our freedom. It's about all of us working to build a more peaceful and just world, and recognizing that peace only comes when we have justice. Yes? Yes. Okay. So I want us to lift up these names, and everybody's familiar with what's happening in Tulsa and the murder of Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa. And everybody's familiar with what's happening in Charlotte. Right now, we're in a period of uprising in Charlotte. People in Charlotte never thought they'd see this kind of level of uprising around the killing of Keith Lamont Scott. And then I also want us to lift up the name Tyree King. And somehow in this last couple of weeks, his name has been lost. The 13-year-old boy in Columbus, Ohio, who was playing with a BB gun and killed by the police. And then they justify it by saying he shouldn't have had the toy, right? And so we need to think about the space that we're in and what it means. I don't know how many of you have seen the tapes or heard the tapes of Keith Lamont Scott's wife witnessing her husband being murdered. Have you all heard or seen that? Yeah. So this is somebody's father, right? He's somebody's father. He's somebody's husband. You know, Terrence Crutcher is somebody's brother, right? We've heard his sister speak so beautifully about the person that he is and was to her, and what it means that he can be walking with his hands up and then but still be perceived as a threat to the police. Yes? Right? What must it mean to a mother to lose her son at 13 years old? That is a baby. 13 years old, because he's viewed as a threat already. And so we absolutely have to lift up those names and remember what the loss feels like and looks like, right? To the people who are most affected by it. But also think about what these losses mean for all of us, right? That nobody's child is safe, right? Nobody's father is safe. Nobody's mother is safe, right? That Black people are being gunned down as if it's a sport, right? And we like to, in Southern California, especially pretend like this is some national phenomenon that exists in places that are far away, like Charlotte, right? With a history, you know, of racial oppression. Of course, that's the South, we say, right? But we like to close our eyes to the fact that LAPD kills more people than any other law enforcement unit in the country by far. And my brother Matt right here, we were talking about, you're from New York, right? Sometimes we talk about New York even, and the murder of Eric Garner, and you know, those names, Akai Gurley, have gone viral, and all of us know those names, but we don't know Brother Africa's name. We don't know Riddell Jones' name. We don't know Jesse Romero's name and Kenny Watkins' name. It's really important that we understand that right here we have a fight to fight. Yes? So this is my favorite Frantz Fanon quote, and I know that you all are at a science institution, that you all emphasize STEM, but I think that it's also important that we emphasize philosophy, right? That we think about why we do what we do. And what Frantz Fanon says is each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Those last two pieces, fulfill it or betray it, are heavy, right? Because sometimes we think that there's a third option. You can just sleep on it, right? You can just do what you do and be neutral, but you can't. You either fulfill or betray your mission. Not your individual mission to, discover something important. Not your individual mission to, do well for you and your family, right? We were talking about that, right? But your generational mission. What kind of world are you building? What kind of legacy are you leaving? Collectively, for the collective, we either fulfill that mission or betray it. So I want to talk a little bit about how I see Black Lives Matter. And I'm going to tell my personal story if that's okay with you. And I promise not to talk too long about it, if you're good with that. Y'all good with that? Okay, so I'm from Oakland. And we talked about being from Oakland. How many of y'all from Oakland? Oh, just me and you. Oh, and I was sitting next to you. That was meant to be. It was fate. It was fate, right? So I'm your parents' generation, though, right? So I am the Panther Cub generation. I was born in the 70s, right? That still makes me 29. And in Oakland in the 70s, all of us, most of our parents, in fact, I don't know anyone's parent who wasn't in the Black Panther Party or around the Black Panthers, right? And so there's this kind of air of consciousness that you just breathe in, right? So you're born into the world kind of engaging in a particular way. So a lot of times my students, I teach Pan-African Studies, we'll talk about what was your first protest. And they'll go, what was your first protest? I don't know, because I was almost literally born at a protest, right? Like that's what we did every single weekend, right? We were protesting something. We learned anytime there's any injustice, you protest it, right? Even down to like the corner store, letting only a few black kids in at a time, but letting everybody else come in all at once, right? We staged our own protest in junior high, right? So we would protest constantly. So there was this understanding that you stand up against injustice wherever you find it, right? And so I was born with that. So I was engaged in what Brenda Stevenson calls episodic organizing, right? All my life. Every time I saw an injustice, we'd rise up, we'd resist, and then we'd go home and wait for the next injustice and rise up, resist, go home. And that became the cycle. And so the thing that moved me, just like the thing that moved my parents' generation, was police brutality and police abuse, right? And even though I'd rise up, resist, and go home on other things, ethnic studies, profiling, something about the state using our dollars to fund the police, to brutalize us, and sometimes even kill us, was something I just couldn't stay home for. I couldn't sit it out. I don't care how tired I was resisting. Right, so I was involved in the struggle for justice for lots of names, right? For Margaret Mitchell when I first moved to Los Angeles, for Devin Brown when I first moved to Los Angeles, for Oscar Grant because I'm from Oakland and the trial was in Los Angeles, right? For Sean Bell, for Amadou Diallo. I remember rising up and being at protests for every single one of those names, and many more who I can't remember right now, right? But something happened that was different for me with Trayvon Martin. And I don't know if you all remember what happened with Trayvon. But for those of us in my age group who were used to rising up, resisting, and going home, we knew that the state often got away with the murder of our people. But something about Trayvon, and those of you who are with me in kind of age can tell me if I'm wrong. We had a level of hope that we didn't have with everyone else, right? So I knew Johannes Messerly wasn't really going to serve no time, even though I was shocked he got convicted. You all know Johannes Messerly killed Oscar Grant on the BART platform, right? I was shocked he got time, but I knew he wasn't going to get any serious time, right? With George Zimmerman, now remember, it took us a while to catch on to the Trayvon Martin case, right? That Trayvon Martin entered into our living rooms late, right? We didn't start getting news of this story until weeks after Trayvon had been killed, right? And so as we start to hear details, we understand, one, he's a child, 17 years old, right? Doing nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong. Killed by someone, so I often kind of try and process, well, why was I more hopeful about the outcome with Trayvon Martin than I was about previous outcomes? I think part of it is because he was killed by someone who wasn't really a cop, right? Remember, Zimmerman was like a cop in his own mind. He wanted to be, he kept applying and kept getting rejected, right? They didn't even want him being no neighborhood watchman, right? He made up the fact that he was neighborhood watch, right? They didn't even want him on that, right? So I was like, he might not get off. Then I also started thinking, he's a cop in his own mind, and he's also white in his own mind, because his mama was Peruvian, right? And many of us saw him and went like, he's not really white, right? And so the justice system isn't going to work for him in the same way that it works for real white people, right? So I was expecting a conviction, or I was hopeful that there would be a conviction of George Zimmerman. And how many of you were on the West Coast when the verdict came out? Yeah. So do you all remember it was a Saturday and that it had become evening? And if it's evening in Los Angeles, it's nighttime in Florida. So a lot of us thought that the verdict wasn't going to come out until Monday, right? In fact, even news outlets started saying, the verdict will probably come out Monday. So my family had grown. I needed a bigger car. So I said, all right, I'm going to go to CarMax and buy me a bigger car. Verdict ain't coming out today, right? I had been glued to the TV all day, right? So I'm at CarMax with my 3 kids. And we're looking for an SUV, and my brother calls. And he goes, where you at? And I said, CarMax. He goes, all right, sit down because you ain't going to like it. And he says, he got off, and they're giving him his gun back. And this fog just kind of overtook me. And I gather my children, and I go home. And I know this is the Inland Empire, but do you all know anything about Los Angeles? Yes? Do you know anything about Black Los Angeles? Okay, so I'm going to let you in on a secret. Where do Black people, maybe somebody else knows, where do Black people go when we get upset in Los Angeles? Arena, of course you know. So this is my comrade from Black Lives Matter Los Angeles Arena. Anybody else know? All right, we'll let him in on it. Where we go? Lamert Park, right? So if you're looking for Black people when there's a time that we're angry, we're in Lamert Park, all of us. Like we don't need no memo, we all there, okay? So I have my kids at home, I feed them, I'm feeling like, I don't know how many of you know the story of Joanne Robinson, the one who called the Montgomery bus boycott. Do you all know her story? No, because it's a science college. You haven't studied this yet, right? So you all should know this. So this is your ethnic studies lesson, okay? Joanne Robinson is the sister who calls the Montgomery bus boycott. Basically what happens is she's grocery shopping in the Piggly Wiggly, and somebody goes, Professor Robinson, she's a professor, Professor Robinson, Rosa Parks got arrested, okay? So she gets all the details, finishes grocery shopping, goes home, cooks, and then goes back to the university and gets all the women she knows, and they mimeograph. Y'all don't know nothing about a mimeograph, but before there were copy machines, like in a lot of our lifetimes, there were these things called mimeograph machines where you had to do this to make copies of stuff, right? And they mimeograph all this stuff and go out overnight and post these signs at every bus stop, don't take the bus, right? So not saying I'm Joanne Robinson, but I felt like her because I went home, I cooked, I bathed my kids, put them to bed, found someone to babysit them, called 3 other mamas. We came and met on my couch and went to where we knew all the angry black people would be, which is where? Leimert Park, right? So that night, when we get to the park, there's like hundreds of people there. And they're kind of milling around. Everybody's milling around and crying and yelling and consoling each other. And I remember there was this one young sister who said it was her first time being out. She was 19. And she said, I don't want to be in this park no more. I said, well, what you want to do? Anybody want to be an organizer, community organizer, or activist, or see themselves that way? Okay, so the first investment you need to make is in a bullhorn, right? They're not that expensive. So I had the power of the bullhorn, right? So the sister said, I don't want to be in this park. I want to march. So I get on the bullhorn. All right, y'all, we gonna march, right? And so everybody floods the street, and there was this internal bickering, but I had the bullhorn. Some people wanted to go south down Crenshaw. Leimert sits right on Crenshaw. Everybody knows Crenshaw. Y'all seen Boys in the Hood, right? So, so it sits right on Crenshaw. Some people wanted to go south down Crenshaw. If you go south, what does the population look like? What do you think? South LA. What do you think it looks like? It's black, right? It gets blacker the further south you go, right? So we know that if you want to make them nervous, if you want to make a statement, don't go south. They don't care what we do south, right? They care what we do north. Some of the communities in South LA are still burnt out from the 1992 uprising, y'all, right? So we ain't going south and repeating that mistake. So I remember being on the bullhorn, and all I kept yelling is, go north. I felt like I was telling people to escape slavery. Go north, right? Right. So we start marching north up Crenshaw. And as we get to Crenshaw and King, which is, just a couple of blocks from the park, there's hundreds of police in riot gear. And they're blocking King. And I remember there were so many of us. By this time, the crowd had grown to thousands of people that we can just kind of rush past them. So we're dodging. They had beanbag guns. They had tear gas rifles. They had yellow tape blocking off the parking lots. And so we're jumping over. I felt like a track star jumping over this yellow tape, right? And we finally get up to the exposition line, and we shut down the exposition line, right? Go home, sleep a couple hours, come back out. The next day, we're out in the streets all day long. This time, we have our children with us, right? So we were the mama brigade with our kids, marching with our kids. That next night, we march all the way to Hollywood and Highland, which has to be, I don't know, what would you say, like 8 miles, Arena? Yeah, like 8 miles. So we march up in the middle of the night, shut down Hollywood and Highland, the tourist center, right? The third day of marching, we march and we shut down the 10 freeway. You all know the 10 freeway because it comes here. We shut down the 10 freeway. And as the 10 freeway is being shut down, my children are begging to, one, get on the 10 freeway. My 9-year-old Tandiwe, or then she was 9, was going, come on, Mama, let's get on the freeway. I'm like, that's what we won't be doing, right? But I'll take the pictures, right? So I'm standing on the overpass taking pictures of folks shutting down the 10 freeway. And some of you may have seen those photos. In fact, there's a now kind of infamous photo of that 10 freeway being shut down that I actually took from the overpass and tweeted out, and then it went viral, right? Because it was the first time a freeway had been shut down to our knowledge, right? In this particular movement, right? And so as I'm standing on the overpass, I get a text message, and I always beat myself up for this because I should have her name on this slide. I get a text message. And I neglected to mention, by the third day, most of my students from Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA were out and part of this march, right? So I get a text message by one of the most phenomenal independent black journalists in the world, Tandasizwe Chimarenga. And so I think it's really important that we think about where we get our news from, right? That many of us rely on corporate media to give us our news, and they're only giving us the news they want us to have, right? So if we think about even outlets that are thought of as liberal, like MSNBC, right, they're controlled by corporations. You all looked at each other. Why? You say that. Okay. So it's important that when we think about commercial media, who pays for it, right? Yeah, large corporations. They're owned by large corporations and funded by large corporations. So if you want the truth, you're not going to get it from them. You're going to get their version of the truth, right? So it's really important that we support independent media. Here in Los Angeles, we have KPFK. Is everybody listening to KPFK? It comes out this way. Yeah? Yes? No? Do people know what I'm talking about? Who does not know what I'm talking about? Oh, wow. Okay. So KPFK is on 90.7 FM, 90.7 FM, and it's listener-sponsored radio. And so what that means, it's even better than NPR, because the Corporation for Public Broadcasting can't take away its funds. Its funds come because you gave $10, you gave $10, you gave $20, and if you don't like what's said and you take back your $20, you will like what's said and you'll give $20, right? So it's independent media. It's a different version of the truth. It's really people's media. Does that make sense? So it's important that we both support and listen to independent media. So Tandasizwe Chimarenga actually has a show on KPFK, a drive time morning show on KPFK. But she also is a print journalist and writes for sources like Truth Out, lots of other places, lots of other independent media outlets. So she and I had become friends around the Oscar Grant organizing work. She wrote the book on that trial called No Doubt. So we're standing, me and my children are standing on this overpass, and I get a text message from Tandasizwe, who's actually forwarding a text from a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours named Patrice Cullors. And I always imagine that if the text talked, it would read as a whisper. It would have said, meet at 9 p.m. at St. Elmo's Village, right? So St. Elmo's Village is a black artist community in mid-city Los Angeles. And this call to meet at 9 p.m. had happened because the three women who were pictured here, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza, had been talking as we were in the streets engaged in what I'll call intuitive organizing. They were engaged in conversations about how to make this a movement, not a moment. How do we build the kind of resistance movement that can topple the structure that we live under? Because it's more than individual instances. It's more than, a single rogue officer, a bad apple who killed Eric Garner or who killed Trayvon Martin or who killed Mike Brown or who killed Ezell Ford or Riddell Jones, or we could go on and on. It's a system. So to topple that system doesn't take just individual uprisings. It takes a movement. And so we need to build a movement, not a moment. A movement, not a moment. And so this is actually our first organized action. So that night we met at St. Elmo's Village and we pledged to be a part of a movement, not a moment. And then within 2 days we pulled together this first march. Our first organized march is Black Lives Matter. And I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. I'm talking about what is now a global movement with more than 50 chapters around the globe. Black Lives Matter. This was our first demonstration. That's one of my former students. You remember Charlia? Right. So Charlia was a track star. So you'll notice we were marching down. That's Wilshire Boulevard, and that cross street is Rodeo Drive. Have you all seen the movie Pretty Woman? That's the mall that she was shopping at, right, on Wilshire and Rodeo. So we decided early on that we want to disrupt spaces of white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism, because that's the system. It rolls off your tongue, right? And we felt like there is no better symbol of white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism than this mall on Wilshire and Rodeo, right? So we marched down Wilshire in Beverly Hills. It was, we're hearing the first kind of march of its kind in Beverly Hills, and we decided to take over this mall. So there's a lot of people behind that are coming, but Charlia is a track star, so she's already at the top of the steps, right? And so that was our first action, our first organized action, not intuitive action, and that's the birth of Black Lives Matter. And so we began to conceive of, well, what is Black Lives Matter? Oh, and I'll just go back real quick. So we also were grappling with what does it mean to be a movement, not a moment? So you'll see a picture of Trayvon Martin and that big hashtag, which is what we called ourselves initially, J for TMLA, Justice for Trayvon Martin, Los Angeles. And then you see real tiny there, Black Lives Matter, right? That's how Alicia had closed a love letter to Black people that she wrote following the acquittal of George Zimmerman. And so we still didn't get that it was Black Lives Matter that should be the big hashtag, right? So we had to evolve into that. So what is Black Lives Matter? Can someone read that?
Black Lives Matter is working for a world where Black lives are no longer systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. We affirm our contributions to this society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. We have put our sweat, equity, and love for Black people into creating a political project, taking the hashtag off of social media and into the streets. We call for Black Lives to Matter is a rallying cry for all Black lives striving for liberation.
So I just want to lift up, I should probably underline this part, that we are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. So one of the things that we need to think about is that the system that we live under didn't just, we didn't stumble into it, right? And Manning Marable writes about this in his book, How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, right? And he talks about the intention of the system. The system was built by people who profit from it, and it's not accidental that Black people are killed by the state, right? And so it's really important that we understand that the police who kill people are doing what they're designed to do. There's a reason we're not getting convictions, right? There's a reason why in Los Angeles they're not even being charged, right? Because it was built to be this way. So the system is not broken. How many of you listened to the debate last night? Right. And what are they lifting up? Even Hillary Clinton is lifting up this idea that the system is flawed, that the police, the good police, want to reform it as much as everybody else, as much as Black people. No, they don't. No, they don't, right? Because the system was built to have this outcome. Does that make sense? There's no way that now the new data is starting to show that Black people, you all know the every 28 hours report, right? That shows that Black people are killed every 28 hours by police, vigilantes, or security, right? So some of the new data is revealing that it's actually more like every 23 hours now, right? So when you have a system that kills Black people more than once a day, right? That's not accidental. That's intentional, right? So how do we then change that? One, if we think about who we're talking to, why we speak in the we, the change for the system has to come from us, right? The system is not going to change itself, no matter if we try to get them to see our humanity, no matter how much we plead, no matter how much we ask for reform, it has to be us. Power concedes nothing without demand. Power concedes nothing without demand, yes? Yeah, and so that's what we're really trying to build, a movement that creates demands of the system. So there's an approach that we have, and how long do I have? Like, I didn't mean to talk this long. I'm good. So, like 20 minutes? What do we have? Okay. All right. So I'll take about 20 more minutes. We'll stop earlier if we need to. So what is the Black Lives Matter approach? How do we operationalize what we say we are? The first thing that we need to do that we don't always talk about is love Black people fiercely, right? So oftentimes Black Lives Matter is criticized because they say, well, you don't address black on black crime. One, there ain't no such thing as black on black crime. That's all white structural racism and violence that is implemented and imposed in our communities, right? And is meted out through maybe black bodies, but it's not black on black crime, right? So how do we love Black people fiercely, right? We have to change the way in which we engage with each other, right? We have to be affirming to one another, right? And so when you come to a Black Lives Matter meeting or event or demonstration, you'll find a different energy in that space, right? And so loving Black people fiercely is hugely important to who we are. I'm going to just kind of go over some others quickly, and then we can talk about them more in the Q&A. So the second thing we want to do is raise awareness. Third thing is mobilize the masses. That means that it can't just be a few of us. All of us have to be engaged and take ownership. And that's connected with number 4. We engage in group-centered leadership. You will never find someone saying, I'm the president of Black Lives Matter, because we don't believe in that, right? We believe in what Mama Ella Baker talks about, that all of us bear the responsibility for leadership. And we lead in different ways, right? Our contribution to leadership can look different, but all of us own the movement, yes? We want to construct a Black-led, ally-supported network, and we have been constructing a Black-led, ally-supported network. Sometimes it's uncomfortable for white people who see themselves as progressives to be challenged around their own white privilege, right? And so we say that if we're talking about Black liberation, and the reason why we say Black Lives Matter, and I know people out this way try to counter it with a retort that's problematic for me, right? That all lives thing, we ain't saying that, right? We're saying Black Lives Matter because Black people are at the bottom of every possible social, economic, and political measure. And so when Black people get free, we all get free, right? And so it is in your interest, whether you are Black or not, to be invested in the Black liberation movement. But it also means that you have to step back as Black people take lead. Yes? We are capable of envisioning and moving ourselves towards freedom. Yes? Developing our own visions of freedom. Number 6, we want to disrupt the system. So that means wherever we see white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism, we're going to tear it up, right? So it can be in a faculty meeting, right? It can be in a supermarket or at a restaurant or on a freeway, right? Or at an airport, right? We're going to disrupt those systems because as long as oppression remains confined to Black communities, things will not change. But when you don't know if you're going to be able to eat your little dinner in peace, right? Then things are going to start to shift. Yeah? So we want to disrupt those spaces. And then finally, we want to vision and build a free and just world. And so that means constantly asking, what does freedom look like, right? And are we really building within our own spaces that we have power in, right? Are we constructing a free and just space, right? So there's a couple of guiding principles, and for all of the guiding principles, you can go to blacklivesmatter.com. There's 19 guiding principles, but I just want to lift up 3 of them. The first is that all Black lives matter, right? And so I want to lift up Shailene Graves because we're in the Inland Empire. How many of you know her story? Okay. So Sister Shailene was just killed a couple months ago in the women's institution here in Corona, I believe it is, Corona. And so she had been serving an 8-year sentence. Shailene was accused of being in a car with 2 male friends who went on a crime spree by robbing stores for a total of $400, right? When she was 19 years old. So 3 of them together. She was driving. She didn't rob anybody. She was driving, stole a total of $400. Nobody was hurt, but stole a total of $400 and got caught. She does 8 years, 19 years old, gets sentenced to 8 years for this crime spree, right? She's a mother. She's a daughter. And 7.5 years 7 years, 10 months into her 8-year sentence. She was scheduled to be released 6 weeks before she was killed. She's found hanging in a jail cell. Who commits suicide 6 weeks before their release? Right? And so every member of her family is very committed to the idea that there is foul play. They have not been forthcoming with evidence, video evidence, logbook evidence. And so we know that Shailene Graves was probably killed in the way that more and more of our black women have been killed recently. So we can think about Sandra Bland, Shailene Graves in Los Angeles. The button I'm wearing is for Keisha Wilson, who was killed on Easter Sunday in LAPD Metro Detention Center, right? That they're dying in their cells. And it's confirmed if you go to the Open Justice desktop, which was created by the State Attorney General Kamala Harris, shows that a huge number of black women are being found dead in their cells, and they're not being reported as deaths at the hands of the state. They're being reported as suicides. So Dignity and Power Now actually collects some of this data, and what they find is one of the lowest rates of suicide is black people on the outside, but the highest rate of suicide is black people who are incarcerated, right? So we have to begin to question whether or not those are actually suicides, right? So Shailene Graves, the reason I'm saying all Black Lives Matter is because Shailene is a black woman. Oftentimes when we talk about Black Lives Matter, people who are not actually in Black Lives Matter frame the fight as a fight for unarmed black men, right? We need to remember that that is not the truth of what's happening, that black women are also being killed by the police. And in fact, in places like Los Angeles, black women constitute a huge number of those who are killed, right? But the second thing is, Shailene was where? Was she a good Negro? You know, they like to paint good Negroes and bad Negroes. You heard Hillary Clinton doing that last night, right? There's some beautiful places in the black community. The black church is one of them, right? Right? You know what? You know what? There are no good Negroes and bad Negroes. We all just black folks, right? And Shailene's life means something whether she's incarcerated or not. So all Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter whether you are a man or a woman, whether you are straight or queer, whether you are cis or trans, whether you are middle class or poor, right? Your black life matters. Whether you have never committed a crime or whether you're incarcerated, your black life matters. So we need to lift up that all Black Lives Matter and reject this idea that some Black lives matter more than others. The second guiding principle I want to lift up is connected with what I just said, which is that we reject respectability politics, right? And so that applies to who's killed, but it also applies to how we get down, okay? So this idea that you have to conform to their rules is hugely problematic. It's part of how they keep us oppressed, right? By saying, you can't say that in the classroom. Yes, you can. Right? By saying that you got to pull up your pants, right? You can't shout in no church. Well, you know what? You shouldn't be hiding the police in the church, right? Police in the church, we going to tear it up in the church, right? Police in the schools, we going to tear it up in the schools, right? So rejecting respectability politics means rejecting it in terms of who's killed, but also in terms of how we get down, right? And then we have to enter the movement as our whole selves. And so I think that can be, I'm going to just show a short clip. This is about Keisha Wilson.
I'm Graham, and Keisha Wilson was my niece.
I'm standing with the mother of Keisha Wilson now, Miss Lisa Hines.
The cousin of Keisha Wilson. This is the woman who died in LAPD custody. They had to go to the black newspaper to get it. They didn't have it in the white media.
How do you spell her first name? I'd actually like to look into this.
This is the president of the commission.
I was in criminal court building at 8:30 till they closed, and they knew.
Keisha Wilson had everything to live for in her son.
Los Angeles Police Department has not been transparent.
We still don't have any answer. Where's the videotape?
The silence just adds to the suspicion.
We don't want this to drag out, year after year. We want some closure. And that was my only child. My only child. Keisha Wilson is not resting.
So the reason I'm showing, or I showed that video, was one, absolutely to lift up the name Keisha Wilson, but two, to also lift up what it means to enter the movement as your whole and complete self, right? That we have to embrace all of who we are in the movement for the movement to have an effect. And so the mothers have an extremely active role in the movement. So we're not, as Black Lives Matter organizers, there's a difference between activism. I want you all to wake up and be active. But it's also important that we become organizers, that we help people to, the difference between organizing and activism is an organizer gets people to act on their own behalf and in their own interest, right? So the mothers of the movement have to be able to bring their pain into the movement. They have to be able to tell their stories in the movement, right? And we have to allow that to happen for the movement to have the effect we need it to have, for it to be a transformational movement. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through a few of our recent actions. Not that recent. So our first occupation as Black Lives Matter was Occupy LAPD. And some of you all know the name Ezell Ford, yes? Yeah. So Ezell Ford was killed August 2014 by LAPD. And when the autopsy report came out, it confirmed what everyone in the neighborhood said, that he had been shot at point blank range in the back by LAPD. And so as soon as that report came out, we came and we took over LAPD, the front of LAPD headquarters for 18 days. And so that's that action. This is, we were waiting for the outcome, and we weren't having as much of an effect as we would like in front of LAPD headquarters. So when I say take it over, that it was an occupation, it means that we were there 24/7 for 18 days. We decided in June to shift it from LAPD headquarters. I mean, we had stopped LAPD headquarters, but we're restarting. We weren't going to start again at LAPD. We started at the mayor's house instead, right? So for 3 days, we were in front of the mayor's house. This is an action that we like to call Black Work Matters, right? Because a lot of times they try to separate folks based on their issue areas. This was a Fight for 15 campaign, and we wanted to say, well, you know what? The fight for Black lives is a workers' fight. Ezell would have wanted a living wage. This is our Freedom Ride that we did last summer. We took a bus from Los Angeles to Cleveland and spent a week stopping in different places. This is our last stop in Albuquerque, where our indigenous family hosted us and did a cleansing, a spiritual cleansing for us. Black Xmas, some of you all will remember that in 7 cities, they allegedly coordinated, because there are still pending charges on this, but the freeway exits just before the airports in 7 major cities were shut down on the second busiest travel day of the year. And then lastly, we just finished 54 days in front of City Hall. I'm not going to show the video, but I will send the link. That was prompted by the LA Police Commission finding that the murderer of Riddell Jones was in policy. So they killed 30-year-old Riddell Jones, who was accused of stealing $80 using a kitchen knife from a local pharmacy. The pharmacist is on record saying that he wasn't scared of her, that he just wanted her to go away, so he gave her the $80. An hour and a half after he reported it, at 1:30 in the afternoon, Riddell Jones was spotted in an alley in a very residential neighborhood of Los Angeles with children looking on. The police came and shot Riddell in the back, leaving her body on the ground in the play. There's an alley that also doubles as a play area for the children. Left her body on the ground uncovered for about 12 hours. And not only dehumanizing her, but also dehumanizing the black residents and children of that area who will be forever traumatized by that action. Riddell Jones left 2 children, a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old, who don't know what happened to their mother. The family of Riddell Jones wasn't notified for 4 weeks of her death. And so when the police commission ruled that that killing was in policy, meaning that that officer, Brett Ramirez, will not only not be charged, he keeps his job. He also keeps his job, and we continue to pay him. So we erupted, and we decided that we were going to demand the firing of the police chief in Los Angeles, who continues to justify the killings that his officers are engaged in. And so we marched the block and a half, 2 blocks from LAPD headquarters to City Hall. We tried to gain entry into City Hall, and the youngest among us had guns pulled on them. Some of us, a couple of the women, including me, were wrestled to the ground and handcuffed as we tried to get into a public building during business hours, right? And so when we were finally released from police custody, some of us said things that we then had to back up, which was, we ain't going nowhere, right? And so we didn't go anywhere. For 54 days, we stayed in front of City Hall, which is the longest black occupation in history. We transitioned from calling it an occupation to recognizing that they are the occupiers. We are the decolonizers, right? So we called it Decolonize LA City Hall. I just want to lift up, this is the gathering in Cleveland that I mentioned last summer when we took the Freedom Ride. I'm going to skip this part, just recognizing time. I want to talk about the role of allies quickly. And we talked about Black Lives Matter being a Black-led, ally-supported organization. What does it mean to be an ally? And so, you know, we absolutely want everybody to be a part of this Black Lives Matter movement. And what it means to be an ally is to really examine the system of white supremacy, the system of racism that privileges those who are not black at the expense of those who are, and be willing to give up some of your privilege, all of your privilege. Be willing to do something that on its face it seems illogical. Why would you want to disrupt a system that privileges you? Well, we're all freer when we live in a free world, right? And so this is an action that some of our white allies did at Ciclavia. Some of you all know what Ciclavia is. Like, there's all these white people on bikes who take over the city, right? So they disrupted Ciclavia. These yellow shirts are, they say, white people for Black lives, right? And what they did is basically say that white silence is violence, right? White people have to be engaged. They have to be willing to, they actually hashtag John Brown 2016, right? So just as we summon our ancestors, they're talking about summoning, you know, who they see as their most revolutionary ancestors. This action here is up in Oakland, and this is Asians for Black Lives. And some of you will remember that for 18 hours, they shut down Oakland Police Department. They actually chained themselves to the front, and those tubes prevent them from being able to get cut out, right? And so their whole idea is that, you know, we are not going to revel in the notion of a model minority, because we know that white supremacy oppresses us too. And so who our allies are black folks, not white supremacy, right? And so we see this kind of willingness of allies to step up and see how Black Lives Matter and the struggle for black freedom is part of their own freedom. I want to just lift up this action because my mama said never get a whole bunch of people in a room and don't ask them for something, right? So Shailene Graves was killed in the California Institution for Women, which isn't that far from here. Black Lives Matter Inland Empire is doing an action that's coordinated with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners on Saturday. It's not far. It's in Chino. I said Corona. Corona Road. That's where I got that from. If you all can get there, you should get there. It's not far, and it's worth the trip, right? If you believe that black freedom needs to happen, if you believe that Shailene Graves' life matters, we need you to get there. And then this is how you plug in. So we need you to do three things. We need three things from you. We need your voice. So every time people say, why is it Black Lives Matter and not, whatever crap they gonna talk, right? All lives, blue lives, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? You now know how to say, well, this is why Black Lives Matter. No, it's not okay to say all lives. We are saying Black Lives Matter. And of course, we're not saying only Black Lives Matter, but we lift them from the bottom, right? So we need you to say it in your voice to your parents, right? We need you to be willing to do that, right? We need your body. We need you to be on the front lines. The more people we have, the stronger we are. One of the things they try to say is it's just a few of us. One of the times, about a year ago, Patrice Cullors, one of the co-founders, and I went and disrupted Eric Garcetti at this international meeting of mayors. And he sent his chief of staff out to first try to arrest us, but then try to shut us up. And then he goes, well, who is Black Lives Matter? Is it just the two of you? And we're going, wait, what? Like, what moments are you in? What have you not been watching? No, Black Lives Matter is not just the two of us. But we don't want anybody to ever say it's 5 people or 10 people or 20 people. This is a mass movement. And to be a mass movement, we need all of us to take ownership of it. So we need your body. And then finally, we need your resources. So we need your resources in terms of dollars for sure, right? So skip Starbucks and give us that $5, right? Because we're not a nonprofit organization. We don't get grant money, right? I know there's stuff on the internet. Oh, they got George Soros money. Y'all heard those rumors, right? Yeah, no, we don't have any George Soros money, right? The biggest money we ever got was Jay-Z and Beyonce, who gave us $250,000 for 50 chapters and about 20,000 organizers. Every chapter got $2,000 from that, right? And then we were thankfully able to hire a couple of staff people temporarily, right, to help us coordinate the work. So nobody's getting paid. So we need your money, but we also need what else you bring. So I know you all are science-y folks, right? You tech folks, we need y'all. We need more than Signal as a communications platform, right? You all know Signal, like the encrypted text. Yeah, so we need that, but we need other stuff. We need you to help us figure out how do we communicate securely, right? We need you to help us with like just basic tech stuff that some of us don't know, right? We need you to think about what it is you bring and bring it, right? And so this is how you plug in literally. You can go to blacklivesmatter.com. The Inland Empire chapter, this is their contact information. You all can write that down. And don't wait for a personal invitation. Anytime something comes up, they mean you. Please come. If you come to LA, we are BLMLA, Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles. And I'll stop there. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Hi.
So first, I wanted to thank you for coming. This is actually the third time I've seen you in person, not that I'm following you. One time at Politicon over the summer, at the panel with Melissa Harris Perry, and then at the meeting turned march in Inglewood over the summer, which was great. Also, the numbers were underreported, just like a side note, because you were just talking about like the number of Black Lives Matter, et cetera. So like I'm a first year at Pomona across the way, and I was coming into the school year thinking that I would have a lot of time to dedicate myself to activism and to supporting the movement. And what I've noticed is that I don't have as much time as I thought. I don't have as much energy. And I've also been questioning like what it means that I can't do this or haven't done it, like haven't shown my support so far since I've been back. And I wanted to know if you had any insight on what myself and probably many people in the room too face is a struggle between not knowing like how much we should focus on our education, because we are very privileged to have this education and these resources, but also to be actual bodies for these very important events.
What's your name?
Zamia.
Zamia, okay. So I'm going to say something that you're going to hate, which is that this is the most time and energy you will ever have in your life. So I know you feel like you don't have any time, but you do, right? So think about how much time you're spending chopping it up with your friends. And maybe you're talking about ideas, but you can talk about ideas at the encampment, right? So be honest with yourself about what you have, right? Maybe you don't need that, me time that you think you need, right? Maybe that me time needs to be us time, us get free time, right? And so use that, right? So you do have more time than you think that you have, and we need you to give it up. Not everything. We want you to finish school, right? We want you to do that. But think about how you can merge some of what you're already doing with the movement, right? And everything doesn't mean we're not at protest 24/7, and sometimes you have to say no, right? So people wanted me to get out on Saturday to do this protest. Police were having something in Leimert Park. They ain't taking our damn park, right? They had something in Leimert Park, and they hit me up. It's an emergency. The police are in Leimert Park. Well, you know what? My 9-year-old was turning 10 that day, right? I'm sorry, somebody else gonna have to go out to Leimert Park. That's not happening today, right? And so you can be honest and say when you can't do something, but there's a lot that you can do. So you don't have to come all the way out to Los Angeles. We would love to have you there, but there's a chapter right here in the IE that, if you go out to CIW, that's a couple of hours, right? Take those couple of hours and do what you can. And then do a little more than you think you can, okay?
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. My name is Teophany. I'm a junior at Pomona. There's a lot of Pomona people here. But I actually just wanted to ask you a question because I'm nearing, I guess, real life, quote unquote, as, school ends and things like that. And I've had experiences interning at nonprofits and in the federal government in DC. And I found that it was a lot of respectability politics, a lot. And as someone who comes from a low-income background and still has to worry about things like financial stability when it comes to my future career, I was wondering what your insight is as to how to pursue a career that still falls in line with your values, but can still help you survive and sustain yourself, because I am interested in policy work, but at the same time, that's working in the system still instead of dismantling it, like you mentioned. So, yeah, I'm not able to say things like white supremacist heteropatriarchy in DC. So how do you talk?
You're allowed to say that. I need you to say that.
Yeah.
For real.
But yeah, I guess what is your advice? If we're trying to, is it just hopeless to work within the system? Do we just not? Or what do we do?
Don't lose yourself to the system, right? So you can't believe what they tell you, that you can't say white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism. Yes, you can. Say that. Say that and shake it up, right? So figure it out for yourself. You have to figure out what your lines are and recognize too that everybody sells out a little bit, right? We don't live in a space of complete freedom right now. So you're going to have to sell out a little bit, but you have to figure out what you're willing to give up to, right? So what are you willing to give up? Maybe you don't get to work for, some particular governmental agency, right? Maybe you're not going to do that. I can't answer the question for you. You have to figure it out. You have to figure out what you believe and what you're not willing to waver on, what you're not willing to be silent about, and then also figure out how much you're willing to sell out, right? So I'm at a point now where I feel like, and I was sharing with the group, my only line is I'm not giving up my kids, right? If I get fired, I get fired, right? I'm not that tied to things. And that's the other thing you have to free yourself from. All this stuff that they say that you need, you don't really need that stuff, right? They're trying to tie you to it. So they tie you to material objects so that you think that if I give it up, my whole life is going to collapse. It's not going to collapse. Figure out what it is you really want to do with yourself. Move with your passion. And I'm also going to say something that I don't know if you all do here. When you are figuring out what your lines are, I believe it's really important to come from a meditative space. So one of the things that helps me to keep relatively sane and answer deep questions for myself is I meditate every single day, right? Meditate and then write down the answers to the questions that come for you, because then it comes from a space of truth. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm Elijah. I'm a third year at Pitzer. And a question I had is, as a Latino, how do I balance allyship with kind of contributing to the Latino struggle here in the United States and abroad? And because it seems like there's a large, in the mainstream media, the narrative is a black and white dichotomy, but as an ally that is also, not to the same extent, obviously, but has some marginalized identity, how do I balance contributing to the Latino struggle and the black struggle?
Yeah, so you have two things you have to do for yourself, which is absolutely work within your own community and struggle for freedom within your own community in a way that doesn't rely on the oppression of other groups, right? So we get down. Let me tell you what's scaring the hell out of people right now. We had a recent action called Black and Brown Shut It Down, and that scared them to death because they killed 3 teenagers in the span of 3 weeks. Richard Risher, who was African American, Jesse Romero, who was Latino but looks black to me, right? And Kenny Watkins, who was also African American. And so we had black folks and brown folks organizing together, and we're seeing this level of solidarity that I've never seen in my entire time in Southern California. That's really important work for you to work on liberation within Latino communities in allyship with what's happening in black communities. But the second piece of it is to also disrupt anti-blackness in Latino communities. So I think you have to do both at the same time.
Hi, I'm Carla. I'm a junior at Mudd, and my question is, Black Lives Matter eventually wants to enact change, and that change being removal of systematic oppression from our government systems. And I guess I'm wondering specifically, how do you envision that change taking place, maybe specifically with reform to our police departments?
So just very quickly, I don't believe in police reform. I believe in the transformation of public safety this public safety system, which means ending policing as we know it. I understand that policing as we know it evolves from slave catching. There's no reforming that. It has to go, right? And so we need to invest in the things that actually make communities safe. Livable wage jobs, mental health resources, after school programs, arts programs, all of the things that actually make communities safe.
Is this okay? So hi, my name is Lynn. I graduated from Harvey Mudd last year, and so now I'm teaching. And something that I see like in my classrooms is that, you know, different students are treated differently, and students from like lower income neighborhoods are treated by teachers like, oh, I'm sorry that you have to deal with these kids' behavior. Whereas with, you know, white students from privileged neighborhoods are treated like, oh, like they're just talking in your class because they're so excited. So it's really frustrating to see that even with like elementary school students. And then, so as a teacher, you know, in front of the classroom, I want to be able to be like, no, like don't do that, but without turning my class into like, I don't know, like a statement necessarily. Like, I'm having trouble articulating this, but basically, like, when you're an educator in front of a classroom, like, how can you like move the classroom from being a part of the system to like overturning it, but without like getting fired?
I'm not very good at telling you how to keep your job, but I'm going to say just short and sweet, just decide. Just decide and do it, right? Just decide and do it. And, you know, read, right? I'm sure you've read Paulo Freire, right? Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Okay, so start with that. That'll answer a lot of your questions. Read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and then a lot of your questions will be answered. Okay? All right. And I think there's one more.
I'm Matthew. I'm a junior at Harvey Mudd College. The question, I guess, this is a little different question than I had before. And this is a little scary, I guess. But in trying to dismantle systems of white supremacy, of heteronormative, patriarchal capitalism, continue down the list, right? It's very consecrated. It's very, like, historically done. It was, like, in place through violence, right? It was in place through like killing people, through disenfranchising people and making sure that they stay in a place. And then, so in your opinion, what place as from resistance, what place does violence have in the movement, right? Because like there's one thing to say or like to like move forward as togetherness of the people, but then it kind of, the buck kind of stops when the military gets involved, when guns get involved, right? They kill the Panthers in their sleep, right? Like what place does violence have in the construction of the movement?
Well, one, I think that we have to be very clear on where violence comes from. So they've done a phenomenal PR job of painting us as the violent ones, right? What's more violent than killing 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley Jones while she's sleeping on her grandmother's couch? What's more violent than killing 12-year-old Tamir Rice for playing in a park with a gun, with a toy that you said was a gun, right? What's more violent than that? So they are the purveyors of violence. We're not, right? Saying we want an end to violence makes us a peace movement, right? Not a violent movement. And so it's really important that we understand, and it's strategic as well, right? So there's a phenomenal book called We Will Shoot Back by Akinyele Umoja that talks about the role of self-defense in Black freedom struggles, right? We're in a space now, though, where I even question that we will shoot back ideal, right? Because they've outgunned us. We ain't gonna win that way, right? There are other things that have to happen for us to win. And even if we think about the history of Black liberation struggle, because this moment didn't come out of nowhere, right? This Black Lives Matter movement moment is part of a continuum of Black liberation struggle. So when we think about what got us free from enslavement, right, chattel slavery, what won us the first wave, or what beat the first lynching era, right? What won us civil rights, what won us voting rights, what won us Black power, right? It was actually the spiritual component of the movement and the willingness for people to come together and rise up and use our bodies and put our bodies on the line. So when you talk about violence, one, I want to say that they're the violent ones, not us, but two, that we have weapons that are much more effective than guns. And I think it's important that we think about all of the weapons that we have. The weapon of our labor, shutting down things in terms of labor, right? The weapon of mass opinion, how do we use that? How do we use spirituality? And so I don't have all the answers, but I think that, one, we have to remember the primary source of violence. We have to envision ourselves as a peace movement. We're building peace with justice, recognizing that sustainable peace only comes with justice, right? And then figure out what it is, where our power derives from. I don't think we're going to ever have a moment like the 1960s when Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers were able to take the State House, right? Try marching up in this Sacramento with some guns now and see what happens, right? If they'll kill a little boy with a toy, right, us marching with some guns ain't going to win nothing, right? Okay. All right. I think that's it. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed you all.